And now people can ask, I've done this for a pretty picture, people can ask, why, let's go on to coral reefs and do a David Attenborough, yeah? You know what I mean? Right. So this poor man, I'm sorry for him, he went and did a stupid thing. He's a professor in Australia, and he told the truth, right? And he told the truth, he got sacked for telling the truth. He's a really nice man, sacked for telling the truth, basically. And then, after that, about a year, a 35-year study came out from the government oceanic department in Australia and confirmed what he said was right, but that doesn't make any difference. This is that story. Coral reefs and what the state they're in. So we're taking the Great Barrier Reef, but it does apply worldwide. There's the record high of the Great Barrier Reef there's ever been since records began in 1985. But I'll give you much more detail. The red dots are the bleachings. I'll give you much more detail than that. And this is the man, brave man.
If you want all the important information about the Great Barrier Reef in one concise report, it's time to download the State of the Great Barrier Reef 2024 report. And now I'm going to tell you all about it, so you probably don't really need to download it after all. First, all 3,000 of the individual reefs of the Great Barrier Reef still have excellent coral. We haven't lost a single reef since Captain Cook sailed down this coast in 1770. Next, when you add up all the coral on those 3,000 reefs, we've never had more coral than in the last couple of years, since records started in about 1986. This despite all the hoo-ha about the loss of coral from hot water bleaching events. Next, we have twice as much coral now than in 2012 after a few devastating cyclones, and the explosion in coral has been the species types that are most susceptible, supposedly, to hot water bleaching events. Next, corals grow faster in warmer water, a lot faster. Next, the coral growth rates have not declined in the last 400 years. Next, we've not lost a single species of plant or animal on the Great Barrier Reef. None. So why don't you celebrate?
He lost his job for that, by the way. Not for the film, for the work he did. He was professor, and all he did was study the Great Barrier Reef, right? Name is Peter Ridd, a really nice man. Have you got a question on that? So coral right around the world is the healthiest, thank you, it's ever been. And the bleachings are natural and they recover. The coral rejects actually, it causes it, and they recover. And if it was temperature like they say, there's 2 points. Further north of the Great Barrier Reef is the Coral Triangle, where the most, if anyone's ever been there and diving, it's fantastic. It's the most coral in the world. It's 2 to 3 degrees warmer than the Great Barrier Reef, right? So the warmer is loved by coral, not colder. So you can't water. And there's another huge point. I'm going to ask you to do an experiment when you get home for those who have baths. I want you to walk into your bathroom and fill it with cold water, the bath. And then to heat it, I want you to turn up the thermostat on the wall for the heating in the bathroom. Because to heat water by temperature of air is minuscule effect. What heats water, the oceans, is the sun's radiation coming in. That's what heats the water, right? You'd have to wait an awful long time before that bath reached the room temperature, right? And this is really important. The water holds 1,000 times more heat, the oceans, than the atmosphere. They control it. That's why those patterns of warm and cold in the oceans are the huge influences. I didn't even mention the La Ninas and El Ninos. They're on top of that, by the way, and there's another one in the Pacific, just like it, right?
It's worth noting that during the editing of this video, the temperatures in both the Atlantic and Pacific have dropped at a remarkable rate and taken what they say scientists by surprise. I don't know why, because, it is expected. So currently we're experiencing extremely cold temperatures, a very big drop in both the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Really, I'm sick of the polar bears, but the biggest improvement we made to polar bear health was we stopped killing them, right? In the 1960s, all the people around stopped killing them. And since then, the expert on this is a woman called Susan Crawford, does all the science on it. They have really exploded, right? So the population of polar bears is the highest since we've been measuring it. Okay? That's another myth. Have you ever heard of the IPCC? Sir, have you ever heard of the IPCC? Do you think that's an authoritative body?
Yeah.
Good.
So what does the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say from the UN? Well, don't forget, they are a government panel, a political panel, not scientists. What they say and the data they have are two different things.
Now I'm going to use this report. You want references. It's table 1212, and that's why I couldn't answer this gentleman's question over there before, because I was dealing with it. But table 1212, page 1856, the latest report from the IPCC. And it's a table, and down this column is about where they happen to be able to detect no signal at all from man affecting these things. Yes? So where you've got a white block, where you've got a white cell, there's no signal, right? Hard to read, so I'm going to list them for you now in the video. Okay?
So no trace from mankind historically with frost, mean precipitation, that's rainfall, river floods, heavy rainfall, that's heavy precipitation, pluvial floods, that's urban floods in cities, etc., landslides, aridity, that's very dry air, hydrological droughts, agricultural and ecological drought, fire weather, that's conditions for forest fires, wind speed, severe windstorms, tropical cyclones, that's hurricanes, etc., sand and dust storms, snow, glacier and ice sheets, heavy snowfall and ice storm, hail, snow avalanche, coastal sea flood, coastal erosion, marine heat waves, and ocean acidity, air pollution, and last of all, weather radiation at the surface. So, with all of those, there is no evidence whatsoever to date of mankind having influenced on all those characteristics with the climate. But what do they claim we have interfered with? Now let's take a look at that. So they claim there are differences in the heat and cold section, I'll go into detail soon, snow and ice section, and open ocean section. Let's take a look at the actual list where the differences are. So this is where they found evidence in the historic record of mankind interfering with it. Of course, any change has to be down to mankind. They found it in mean air temperature, extreme heat, cold spell, permafrost. So far, all those are related to temperature, the permafrost melting, etc. there. Lake, river and sea ice, not ocean, but lake, river and sea ice, mean ocean temperature, ocean salinity and dissolved oxygen. Now, the key here is that all of those are related to one thing, change.
That's changes in temperature. Okay? Cut it short there. So, the IPCC agree in the data, so how the hell do they issue and scare everyone for all those things? Because the scientists don't write the report. The summary report for policymakers is from an individual nominated by each government, normally politicians and things, who sit in a room with a bloody big screen in front of them, and every single sentence, green or red, until they agree. When they agree, it goes green and passes through. And they want to transfer of money from the West to the underdeveloped world. And that's what the whole game's about. It's got nothing to do with science. So they ignore their own scientists. That is a fact. What I've just shown you is not mine. I've given you the reference number. I've given you the page number. You can look it up yourselves, right? That's from the IPCC, the authority you trust. Yeah? Hold on. Can we get a mic?
Now, what I've just done is in two parts. I first explained what the IPCC state they cannot find any human interference with on all that long list. I then state what they do find human interference with, which is to do with temperatures, heat, and all those last subjects I did. So I've already declared that the IPCC stay. But now I get challenged on the temperature aspect, which I've already covered, that they do state there's influence by man in terms of temperatures. I explained it. But it seems to make no difference to this gentleman because I think he's determined to try to catch me out. And it's confusing to answer because I keep answering the same question, which is not accepted because there's an agenda just to state something rather than carry on a conversation. Anyway, here it is.
You've got to respect this man for turning up, I tell you.
From IPCC 5, Chapter 10. Here's a direct quote from IPCC, not the Intergovernmental Panel. So this is from the scientists.
Which paper?
This is the IPCC paper 5.
I'm in 6.
Chapter
6. The
Okay.
latest.
But in 5, because they've got a chapter on detections and apportionment,
Yes.
attribution, they call it.
Attribution.
Okay, so here's the quote. It is extremely likely, and
Yeah.
that's defined at the bottom of this page 896. It is extremely likely, 95 to 100% certain, that human activities caused more than half of the observed increase in global mean surface temperatures from 1951 to 2010.
Which again is what I've just stated, that the IPCC state mankind has influenced the temperature. And by the way, he's saying maybe a bit more than half is due to man, and the rest then I assume is, well, it must be natural. It's quite interesting, but totally besides the point, because I've already declared the IPCC are saying temperatures are influenced by man, which is what he's saying. But he doesn't seem to understand what I talk about or what I say. I found it very frustrating.
So the scientists, the 4,000 members of the IPCC, are unequivocally saying that the attribution for this, and they can say with 95 to 100% certainty, I accept that's 5% down.
Now, let me answer that now. I just said that. I just said that they said the temperatures are attributable to man. I actually said it. So you haven't disagreed with a single thing I've done there.
You pointed out what the Intergovernmental Panel had changed and said that they were picking reds and green paragraphs and so on. This is straight from the scientists' mouths.
But that also agrees from the scientists. I said they say that mankind's interfered with the temperatures. I said that. I said, what do they say mankind's interfered? I can play it again if you want. And I said, it's the temperature they go on.
Okay, so if you're clear that you agree, that's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I just want to be absolutely clear on that, because I just said it, and I'll try to rush it to that point. Having gone through what they can't find it, right?
So no trace.
I'll try to move it.
Frost. Mean precipitation, that's rainfall. River floods. Heavy rainfall, that's heavy precipitation. Fluvial floods, that's urban floods. That's all.
Well, just go back to the heading of that in red. And what are you saying there? You're saying nothing emerged in historic records to indicate other than natural. Well, that's not what I've just read. They're saying it's 95 to 100% certain that it's...
Yeah, you're wrong, sir. You're 100% wrong on this. Let me explain. What I've just said is what they say. There's nothing they've found other than natural and all those things. So not man, okay? When you come to heat, so I go through that, I say, then what do they say man's done? And I then go through the ones man's done, and there they are. Mean air temperature, extreme heat, cold spell. So I'm saying the heat, and they all come down to temperature.
Sea ice. No ocean, no, they could run sea ice.
So I've just said, on temperature, the IPCC say they are 6, mankind's interfere.
Okay, so the evidence, and that is evidence of human interference with this.
Yes. These are the human interference ones, cause heat. Yes?
Yes, global warming, climate change.
Well, not as simple. No, it's not climate change. It's global. We'll call it global warming at the moment. Doesn't matter. I'm not going into the semantics. What you've just done is not properly understand what I've just shown, because what I said is the thing we disagree on with the IPCC is temperature. And that's what I'm moving on to now. And the next bit's the most important part of the evening for me, right? This is the heart of the CO2 myth, right? And I'm going to show you the work of world-famous professors. And this evidence and the work is checked by direct observation, that third rule I started with. Try to watch this. It's really worth learning, because if you understand what I show you here, you've got the heart of the whole thing. Everything else is not important compared to this bit. I'll start explaining that by introducing the atmosphere to our planet. So here now we have the atmosphere. Now let's see how different molecules behave to cause global warming, in effect, to keep us warmer than would otherwise be the case. We'll call this little chap here our CO2 molecule. Now the CO2 molecule, with most frequencies of radiation coming from Earth, most frequencies of infrared, does nothing. The radiation passes right the way through it. It has no effect at all. But at certain frequencies, it becomes excited, gets very excited, dances around, captures the infrared for a tiny, tiny amount of time, and then expels it off in all directions. but by expanding it off in all directions, it's sending half of it back to Earth, and that reduces the radiation loss to space. So what is called the greenhouse effect is simply a reduction in the infrared radiation we lose to space. Now our CO2 molecule, I'm going to pause. This is so important. This is the infrared spectrum. This is the infrared heat leaving Earth. This is what goes off into space. And this red curve is no atmosphere at all. Right? But we do have atmosphere. And we have CO2. So what does the CO2 do to warm us is the question. Right? And so here we've got very little radiation going. It doesn't have an opportunity. But when it gets to 500 or 600, wow, there's a lot of heat can escape. Right? What does CO2 do? I'm going to deal with CO2 and methane. The work deals with 5, but the rest are so insignificant, right? But we're going to do CO2 first. And just to put your mind at ease, this part I'm showing you, the scientists on the other side agree, right? At these higher frequencies here, 2000 or so, does nothing. It doesn't do anything to stop the heat loss to space. But as we move along, 1500, still nothing, 1000, still nothing. But when we get to about the 600s, wow, it really is effective. So the CO2 molecule dancing sends half the radiation it grabs back to Earth and then puts a hole in that red curve. Okay, so we've seen how the CO2 molecule gets excited and grabs that radiation to send it back to Earth, therefore reducing the loss to space and warming the Earth. And it's an incredible global warming molecule. It really is. But it's not alone. And there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is water vapor. Now, water vapor is invisible, by the way, and it's right the way across the range. So now we're going to introduce water vapor with a few other greenhouse gases, and you can see the effect overall of what's being reduced going to space. So let's, at the click of a finger, add water vapor and a few of the other greenhouse gases. So there we have the effect of all the greenhouse gases on the atmosphere. And we'll flick between what normally goes into space without any of them and what actually goes into space after we apply them. So now changing the greenhouse effect. So far, CO2 warms the planet. Fact, right? It does it by reducing the radiation that's going into space and sending it back to Earth. Fact. Right? So people who say it's only 420 parts per million and everything can't have it, that's rubbish. They're wrong. I've got people on my side who don't understand this, and there are people on the other side who don't understand this. But the real scientists, the real people understand this. This curve is called the Stefan Boltzmann curve, and the curve actually was created at the beginning of the 1900s, but they couldn't get it right. So people had to work on it, and it caused the creation of quantum physics. So the birth of quantum physics came from this work. This work's done with quantum physics, by the way. But I'm trying to explain it with robots, because you don't have to understand how, because you'll see why you don't have to understand how in a second. So now we've got this shape going off, okay? And going off into space. The heat that's retained because of it back to Earth, we're changing that to green. The green is the greenhouse effect. Whilst all this is fine in theory, in science, the theory has to match observation. It has to be proven to be right by looking in the real world and saying, is this what the satellite is measuring? So now we're going to look at 3 points on Earth. This is really important. Remember my rules, right? The leading scientists in the world, these are 3 times advisor to 3 USA presidents, yeah, backed up by Nobel Prize winners and so on. And not disputed on the other side, this part. Not disputed on the other side. And why they can't dispute is coming up. The measurements, now what is the shape of the curve leaving Earth that the satellite tells us? Yeah? Measured by the satellite and calculated by the work I've just shown you. The curves are different in each place because all this is without clouds. There's no clouds in all the measurements. But there's no theory can be applied anywhere in the world. And the 3 areas we're taking are the Sahara, the Mediterranean, and the Antarctic. So let's look at what the satellites showed us. Taking a look at the Sahara Desert first, on the left is the theory and on the right is what the satellites observed. Let's just check that observation against the theory, and I'm going to bring that image across to match it. The matching is remarkable. This is proof that the theory is correct. And exactly the same applies to the Mediterranean. And by the way, it's the shape of the curve that matters here. The actual value, the actual height, depends on the temperature at that time of observation. Now taking a look at the Antarctic. Well, there we are. There's the theory on the left. Now, this is amazing, this bit. This will surprise people, right? But again, everything is observed and checked and not disputed. You'll know at the end of this part more than 99.9% of the population about climate change. And there is the observed on the right, a very close match indeed, verifying the theory is correct. But there's something very unusual about it, very unusual. The part below the red dotted line is the curve we know when there's no atmosphere. That's the maximum that can go to space from a body when there's no atmosphere. I'm going to just fill them in to show you something. Now there we are. The red is what would have gone to space, the very beginning of this video, without any atmosphere. But more goes to space than there would be. So something is pushing out the heat. It's actually a positive pull-out of the heat past what would be natural. And that means that the greenhouse gases are actually cooling the Antarctic. And of course, this is backed up by observation. Here's a list of just some of the observations. You can check it out. It's been cooling, as we know, from measured temperatures every decade for the last 40 or years. So what is the reason for this? That greenhouse gases actually cause cooling in Antarctica. And the reason's quite simple. Antarctica is a huge continent. It's not a country. It's a huge landmass, and it's a desert. It's a very dry desert. The temperatures are so low, moisture can't stay in the atmosphere, as it were. And as you go up in the air in Antarctica, unlike the rest of the world, it gets warmer. It's called the Antarctic temperature inversion. The really important thing here is to remember this is what is being measured. So this is being measured by satellite. This is not just theory. It's theory that checks out in practice. And that is the foundation of all science. So as the famous physicist Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, and that means observation, by the way, it's wrong. So no one can tell you that greenhouse gases are actually causing melting in the Antarctic, because it's the opposite. And we not only have the theory behind that, the physics, but we also have the observation. What you should be terrified about is not these scare stories, none of which have ever been proven to be correct. But you should be scared of all the money and industrial savagery that's being imposed on the West by the net zero policies that do not have a scientific basis. So having flipped back to our original chart, with the green showing the greenhouse gas effect and the red what's going off into space, let's take a look at that CO2 hole with the question, what if we double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? How much would that hole grow? And the answer is, the theory shows, just 1%. In other words, we'd retain just 1% of the radiation back to space. That's it. And that 1% means that if you double CO2, you'll get 0.7 degrees centigrade worth of warming from it. That's not allowing for other factors I'm going to show you. But that is for a doubling of CO2. We haven't even got enough fossil fuels in the world to do that. And the reason is that you can consider the CO2 already saturated. It's already done its job. It's a bit like painting a wall red. Painted 2 or 3 times red, and additional coats really make very little difference. And it's just the same with adding CO2 to the atmosphere. Even doubling the amount of paint on the wall, in this case, or the CO2, only adds 1% of the total effect it had to date. That's right. The alarmists and realists do agree on the science I've shown you so far. So if that's the case,
Why the alarm from the alarmists? Why are they predicting a much warmer future than that 0.7? And the answer lies in what they call the feedback. And that I will now explain. Now, basically what they're saying is, the 0.7 causes more warming. Yes. The 0.7 causes more warming, which means more moisture goes into the atmosphere. That moisture in the atmosphere causes more warming, and so on. And they treble the 0.7, basically. So the difference between our side and the other side is the feedback. Yes, the feedback. And they treble it and we don't. And that's the difference. That's the whole core of the whole dispute. Yeah? So we're going to go into that a bit now. Has everyone understood this part? Yeah? You got the message? Because we're going to get important. We're going to get really good stuff now. Now, this is a video again on a follow-up to that. To introduce the next very important aspect of climate change, which no one has ever managed to model, I'll use the words of a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, but still somehow. It's cloud illusions, I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. And that is very much the case with science. We simply have not been able to model them to date. All we can do is look at both sides of them and draw some general conclusions. The sun, of course, controls everything. Imagine sunbathing on a beach and a cloud comes over. Immediately that cloud comes over, you feel the difference. You feel it instantly. And what's happening is the cloud has cut off the shortwave radiation from the sun. You see, and you all feel that when a cloud comes over when you're sunbathing, you know it. It's not the air that warms you, it's the radiation that warms you. Right? And you're going along the car, and if it's really sunny, you'll feel the heat in the car coming through the glass from the radiation, right? So you all know this. I'm trying to relate everything I do to ordinary back into space. The Earth did not get it, and nor did your skin when you're sunbathing. But hold on here. The clouds also act as a blanket. They keep you warm. They insulate you. Correct. But the cooling effect is about 50 watts per square meter, which is about 12 degrees centigrade. And the warming effect by the insulation is 30 watts a square meter, or about 7 degrees centigrade. So in effect, the clouds cool you by a merged 5 degrees centigrade. That's the overall for the Earth. Doubling CO2 leads to 0.7 degrees centigrade, and the chances of doubling it are remote because there aren't enough fossil fuels to do it. But clouds are over 7 times more powerful than the doubling of CO2. Now, one study by NASA, based on nearly a decade of satellite data, estimated that about 67% of the Earth's surface is typically covered by clouds. This is especially the case over the oceans, where other research shows less than 10% of the sky is completely clear of clouds at any one time. So more warming can create more water vapor, correct? But also more clouds. And these are the natural thermostat of the Earth. These control and limit that runaway effect, that feedback. And there is no scientific evidence that clearly supports the feedback. And the net result is that the climate models are way out. And don't forget, climate models are just opinions. They're not facts. They're not evidence. They're just pointers to how a model would work if it was right. So let's look at the natural temperature rise there has been since 1979, measured by satellites all over the Earth, the most accurate measure of temperatures, and compare that to the models. Well, this graph has along the horizontal scale the dates, and on the vertical scale a range in centigrade from minus 0.5 degrees centigrade to plus 2 degrees centigrade. So the entire range is only 2.5 degrees centigrade. So here we have the green line. The green line, please note there are cycles in it, is the observed temperatures by satellite recording from NASA satellites. And the red line is the average of all those grey lines. The grey lines are all the different model outputs. Now you can see the huge variety here in outputs from the different models. There's nothing settled about model science. The red line is basically the average of all these wrong estimates by the models, because none of them, except for one, agree with the actual observed temperatures. So they fail the hypothesis that they are correct. The Russian one here is the only one that is roughly in line with observed. And by the way, the observed satellite temperatures also agree with the observed balloon temperatures by sending up weather balloons. So measurement here is not agreeing with all the climate models. And generally all that bunch of climate models there, which the IPCC take the most alarming of, by the way, to scare you, all those models there allow for around 3 times the heating because of the feedback caused by the retained radiation I showed you, by that 1% retained radiation. So observed data from both satellite and weather balloon do not agree with any of the climate models, with that one exception of the Russian. It may be of interest to note that just recently I gave a talk in a committee room in the UK Parliament and featured the basis of this video in it. And after my talk, Viscount Monkton stood up and pointed out that he'd gone to Russia and explained the simple division mistake that the modelers had made in assessing the feedback, and they put it right and hence adjusted it back to rough agreement with the satellite and balloon observations. That was that was just pot luck, that. So, International Satellite Cloud Climatology Project. It's a government project. There's the link. NASA. The net effect of clouds on the climate today is to cool the surface by about 5 degrees. So what I've just given you, that 5 degrees cooling of clouds, is backed up by the NASA work. Yeah? I'm not your normal, what they call deniers. I think you've maybe understood that tonight now. I give you evidence all the way. So I've just explained this in simple terms, backed up by NASA's project, which they call the Cloud Climatology Project. But when water vapour increases, clouds are a natural climate control, but they're ignored by the alarmist models. The alarmist models do not include clouds. But someone can say, oh yes, they do. There's one or two that do. They put a fudge factor in. They don't understand it. It's like saying I'm wrong, so I'm going to make it 10% less. But when you take it, none of the models work backwards. If you project the models backwards, 20 or 30 years, they don't work. They're all over the place. If they worked, if they understood it, they'd work no matter when it was done. Right? I can't help feeling. Oh, missed that out. Methane, we'll do a quick one on methane, because we've got to save the cows, haven't we? You know, how many cows they want to kill in Ireland? 200,000? I'm serious, right? Because of methane, because of farting and beep burping, yeah? So we're going to now use the same technology, because believe it or not, they didn't just do CO2 on those curves, so I can do this quicker now because you understand it. We're going to do methane, right? Well, it's now time to take a look at scary methane, that substance that 30 times or maybe 100 times more powerful than CO2, that can escape and destroy everything. So let's look at what a doubling of methane would do. The methane molecule acts just like the CO2 molecule, but it gets excited at a very different frequency, a much higher one. And it's in this pink band here where the methane molecule is excited. And straight away you can see it's limited by the extent, by the height of the possible emission. But what we're going to do now is dive in. We'll first look at how much the existing methane in the atmosphere contributes to global warming. How much radiation does that hold back? And the answer is in this coloured blue area here. It is tiny. It's not a significant amount today that it's holding back in terms of radiation. But if you double the CH4, if you double the methane, what happens then? Well, it's the difference between the black line and the red line, the tiny areas between those. It is so small that it's insignificant. The scare story about methane is based on flawed science. It's as simple as that. And by the way, when methane is burnt as a fuel, it ends up as water vapour and CO2. And we know that more CO2 has negligible effect. So methane doesn't end up changing the climate by any significant amount at all. And the doubling of it, as I've just explained, has next to no effect. It's so small you can ignore it. Because in the real world, it has to share its role with water vapour. And the water vapour dominates. Okay?
Arctic that refuses to melt. They predicted it going so many times, right? Don't think that's a video. Oh yeah, it is a video. Oh, that's just a title. Flick on to the next one. This is the Arctic sea ice melt since 79. 79 was the coldest time, the end of the scare, the Ice Age coming scare, was the coldest point. Yeah? So we'll pay this. It's a quick one, this.
This is a graph of Arctic sea ice extent since 1979. It's from the alarmists, and there they've drawn a nice straight line down. Although, frankly, it shouldn't really be like that, because it's pretty well levelled out this century. In fact, just putting that graph on a different horizontal scale and stretching it out a bit, it's easier to see this pause. It's levelled out for 9 of the last 10 years. So what's the historic record before 1979 like? And as you can see, historically, the sea ice Arctic extent was cyclical and bore no relationship to the rising CO2. And in actual fact, the highest ice level in the recent times was in 1979, the start of the alarmist graph. So let's merge the two graphs together, the alarmist graph, which starts in 1979, and the historic graph. And there you have the deception. They have hidden the history, just like they did with forest fires and many other issues. They use the starting data cycles at the highest or lowest point in order to deceive you. Based on the 1999 reports. So clearly the 1930s were hotter, and then it cooled, as we know, from the 1940s until 1980 when it warmed again. But clearly the 1930s were the hottest. But just 2 years later, in 2001, NASA have a new graph for the same period, and suddenly the 1930s are now cooler than today. But hold on here. I can hear the alarmist cry. You just compared global temperatures here to USA temperatures. That's not fair. But just to make the point, here are the USA temperatures adjusted, and it's just the same result. They cool the past and increase the temperature of today, and the fiddle is enormous. It's a huge subject, this. Right? Now, what this gentleman was talking about before, he's a member in your parliament that's actually turned up. I respect him so much for that. This is the UK Met Office weather stations percentage by World Meteorological Class. That's how accurate they are. So 5, 2, and 1. These are called junk. The green ones are considered good. The green ones are only 13.7% of all the gauges. That is not me. It's the World Meteorological Organization classification. And when they scale you, they use the 2 and 5 degrees, right? You cannot use temperatures there. And I'm very happy. If you give me your email, I'm very happy to positively push all the information to you on this. But this is a fact. And you say science, you have a trust in science. They can measure it to 0.1 and all this. No, they can't. When you're measuring the temperature of the box, whether it's a computer or anything else. But there is a setup called really good setup in America to get around the urban heat island and all the measurements problems. They created a whole pile of stations across America and said these are the best, triple redundancy, everything. These are perfect. They did it in 2005, 19 years ago, but they've got a problem. They have to ignore it now because there's no warming. There's no warming at all. I may mention this, I don't know. Anyway, that's that. This is fiddled temperatures. These heat waves throughout time. And of course you're being told that today's heat waves are much hotter than the past. And of course the reason for that is that they fiddle the temperatures. They quote temperatures like Heathrow as a record for the UK. That thermometer is on the runway. And so is the next record on the next record. The top 3 were Heathrow Airport, would you? But that's exactly what they've done. They've taken the record temperature from this station at Heathrow, with all the jets not just taking off and landing, but also taxiing and turning so the jets go right onto it. It is unbelievable. This climate station is right in the middle of the urban heat island effect. It's in the middle, basically, of a city, and the whole area is subject to a much higher temperature than the surroundings. Okay? I've got to carry on. It's getting late.
The bats don't have to be hit. A 90% reduction in diving birds off the Dutch coast on the ocean. 90% reduction in diving birds. 200,000 bats a year killed in Germany, right? Tens of thousands of birds killed. And if you think about it, if you put something traveling at 150, 180 miles an hour at the tip, because that's what they're traveling at, the animals don't understand that. Germany also 3,500 tons of flying insects, which actually have a big effect ecologically, because it may not sound much, but a ton of insects is a lot, and so on. So all of these things are not green. And the Green Party representative in this country is on record as stating that she doesn't worry about it because it's worth it to get cheaper energy. Right? That's on record, by the way. And I worry about it. I own a nature reserve. I have badgers, I have all sorts of things. The thing that'll do well in your forest when you put them up are the foxes, because they eat all the birds and things and everything. The lungs of a bat explode because they can't take the pressure change near the blade, so they don't even get touched, right? You're going to put up these mashing machines, you're going to have to bury right the way through to the rock to get across the bog. You're going to have to then create things bigger than this room, 5 of those, and fill them in concrete and steel with all the traffic. Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, so it really is a joke. So that's the Owl's Hatch, and this is my MP, the chief whip. Chief whip in the UK he was, and I gave him this Owl's Hatch, 49,305 megawatt hours. There's the number of homes, 12,978.
What I'm going to say here applies to every single solar and wind farm in the UK. They all tell you how many homes they can supply. In this case, I'm taking Owl's Hatch, which is a solar farm. It's the largest UK one. So I'm taking that as an example. But as I say, it applies to every single wind and solar farm. So here we have their own claim, this is from their website, 49,305 megawatt hours a year are supplied. And that supplied, they claim, to 12,978 homes. So per home, this is what you get. And the answer is 3.8 megawatt hours per year for each home. So looking now to Ofgem, you get 11.5 megawatt hours per annum of gas and a 2.7 megawatt hours per year of electricity needed. But the total of those two for the home is you need 14.2 megawatt hours of energy, and not just the 3.8 megawatt hours supplied by the wind or solar farm. So basically, when wind and solar farms quote the number of houses to you, in broad terms what they mean is this. We can supply, say, 10,000 homes, providing 80% of the energy is coming from gas power, and we need the backup gas for when the wind does not blow or the sun does not shine. Plus, we need those gas stations to be spinning on standby. We also need you to pay us even when it is windy overnight and you do not need the energy.
That's a more truthful statement. Okay. I missed that. My MP called me a conspiracy theorist for that division, right? He's the chief whip and he enforces policies and he refuses to divide one number by another, for which I'm called a conspiracy theorist. Yeah? I feature him in every talk around the world. So I've done 2 parliaments so far featuring the man, right? I'm a conspiracy theorist for pointing that out, that simple division. That's how bad the resistance is I'm finding in politicians. But unlike him, this gentleman came tonight, and asked the right questions, good questions. Right, this I'm going to console you with. I've got a great idea, so don't trust the experts. I'm going to build a solar farm on the ocean. I'm going to put rubber floats underneath them, and we're going to layer out, and we're going to not have to pay for the expensive farmland. Isn't that great? Right? This happened before it opened. Oh, sorry. I'll go back on that. I call that stupid. They have waves on the ocean. Obviously, someone didn't know that.
Criminal.
Yeah. So, but that makes you feel better. There are worse look, I'm sure all your politicians are sincere. I'm pretty, accept that. I think they're all honest. There's some sort of cult that blots the mind or something that does all this. This is, now you can get this anytime. All you do is type in energydashboard.co.uk, you get this, right? And I just typed it in, you can type it in. The green stuff is the wind. And you got the solar in the middle of the day there, the orange. The imports are purple. We're importing an awful lot. The bottom is your nuclear and mainly your biofuel, which is the worst sin against mankind you could ever imagine. The biofuel called Drax, right? Where they actually have huge machines in America. They go and make roads, and they go into forests, and they chop all the trees down. They pick up the trees and chop them. They put them on big diesel trucks, these huge American diesel trucks. They take them to a plant, and in the plant they pelletize them using fossil fuel, and they turn them into pellets with a lot of heat, and then they put them on a train, chug across America, where they put them on a boat that burns, I don't really know this, they start with normal diesel, but they run on really dirty diesel, and they cross the oceans. Not satisfied with that, they go all around Scotland and come down to the nearby Drax, and they put them on a train again, chug. How many tons? 37,000 tons a day. 37,000 tons a day. Now, what did that replace? That replaced a coal mine a few miles away where they had half the amount of trains needed anyway because it's twice as dense as wood, yeah? And so instead of taking it from a coal mine a few miles away, and it actually burns more CO2. But don't worry, we can cure this. This is almost equal now to the floating solar farm. We can bury the CO2. And use a lot of energy to bury. This is the most stupid idea in the world. I'm not going to go into it, it's too detailed. But I just want to show you. And that's the overnight. You can see the dip overnight. Okay? You get that any time of day, anytime. And I'm not going to show you. This is about when the wind doesn't blow. I'm going to save time now. I'm going to skip this one. The latest offshore floating wind farm accepted. That's not right. It's £246 per megawatt hour. It's about 8 times what we should be paying. An expensive future's coming to UK. Right? Video. What 20 megawatt looks like.
No, I have done a video on this, the IoM second video I did, which I distributed well before.
This is what's killing you all waiting.
But this is the IoM roadmap 2026 plan to have 5 times 4 megawatt turbines. Now these turbines are 150 meters high, which is 65% higher than St. Paul's Cathedral. With these relatively small wind turbines, and that's relatively small compared to some today, which are 3 times bigger, the blades are about 50 meters long. Here is a 57.5 meter blade being transported, just showing you some of the difficulties in even getting it to site. And you've got to imagine this being transported to the Isle of Man and being shipped around the Isle of Man, building the roads and putting the wind vanes up. It's a big project. Of course, if you're going to go through all this trouble and expense in putting 5 of these up, so that's 15 blades like this. And of course, these huge, absolutely huge foundations have to be...
So this is the thing. There it is there. And you see the area they've got to clear around it to get in? You lot, I've got 5 of those going into that small forest. You won't have animals left in there, right? It's a total destruction of the environment, right? All my life, I've worked to stop that. That's what's coming.
And of course, steel. And then, of course, there's a carbon footprint of all this manufacturing and transporting of these veins across the world, like turbines, etc. The mining of all the elements to make those turbines. And it is probable that the CO2 footprint will not be replaced for about 12 years anyway, and the lifespan can be as little as 15 years. Then you'd expect a good return, you'd expect, to achieve something with it. But in practice, you do not. All you do is spend. There is no benefit to you at all. You will be duplicating a complete energy system at great cost for no benefit at all, and a lot of negatives, because all the resources going into this are a negative for the planet, not a positive, because CO2 isn't even the issue to begin with. Well, there are just 2 ways of taking the energy from the wind farm to the grid, to your grid. And one is by pylons here, pretty unsightly, and of course, a lot of construction again. And the other is underground, burying them. That's more expensive, the underground route. So you have got quite a lot of disruption. And by the way, there's a loss in energy on this transmission to the grid, as there always is with any length of transmission. I do not know which one you are going for, but I think you should ask. Well, if the Isle of Man sank below the waves, the calculations in the flawed science, that's the alarmist calculations, would be that we maybe save 0.5 of 1 degree C in the future. That is ridiculous. But that's for it sinking below the waves, which you don't plan to do. So for these mass going up, you'd get something like, at the best, 11% of your energy on average supplied. You still need 100% of the gas backup, because when the wind's not blowing, you've got to have stable energy resources. And your utilities head has clearly stated they cannot afford to expose the Isle of Man to having no power. So what is your gain from the 11%? Well, it's in the region of 1/40th millionth of 1 degree C. In other words, it's so small that it's undetectable. Your second stage of adding 4 7-megawatt turbines to give another 28 megawatts doesn't happen until 2040. And even then, only about a quarter of your power on average will be coming from wind, and the disruption to your regular backup supplies with having to keep the gas turbines spinning, etc., will be significant. To put a perspective on this, forget the Isle of Man disappearing. Imagine the UK disappearing below the waves. Or let's make it bigger. Let's make it the whole of Europe disappearing below the waves. And then we might as well add the USA below the waves, and Canada below the waves. And we'll add to the mix South America. And if all those places disappeared below the waves, CO2 would continue to rise, and still rise rapidly from Asia. And it's very good, the fact they're doing that, they're doing us a great favour, because these are available on our World in data. Anyone can go to them. Record cereal production, record cereal yields, hardly any increase, no increase in land use, but these record yields over the years since 1961, right? This is corn yield, it's the same for rice, all records because of extra CO2. We've greened the earth enormously. In a 30-year period, which ended 2010, NASA calculated that the greening of the earth is the equivalent of 2 USA land masses going from desert to green. We are reducing deserts. I haven't got into the detail. We're reducing it because as a plant gets more CO2, it needs less water, because the holes it's grasping the CO2 with is smaller. It needs less of them. And so it lets moisture out. The plant tries to keep moisture. So if you reduce the need for moisture in the plant, it's able to ingress into the deserts, and they are being ingressed on. All that is crap, what you're being told. Right. You've got a brainwashed world. And by the way, the attitudes are changing. This is a survey. This is not science. This is like the gentleman was referring to before. These are opinion polls. And the youngsters even are beginning to decline on their support of this nonsense in America, and here even. So the child abuse. This is, hair, don't you? And we're meant to have it eating insects, and all this is coming your way. And in your report, it says they want your behaviour to change. Your politician's report, that report says, we've got to change your behaviour. You've got to travel this, you've got to do this. So I'm going to finish off now. This is the very end of my talk. And I just want you to remember this.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Thunberg, thank you for your involvement here today. I commend you for your willingness to testify and get involved with public policy. In the past, when you're talking about climate change, you have said, quote, "I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day." Is there what particular study or scientific report did you read that made you come to this conclusion?
Thank you for a question. First of all, let me just clear that those are metaphors. In speeches, you often use metaphors. Of course, I don't mean literally that I want people to panic. So there was no scientific study that made me come to that conclusion.
But my grandchildren were given the afternoon off school in Bristol to go and see Greta. Actually, mine wasn't, because the mother said, "Tell me what she's about," because she was joining in the big jamboree. And if you can't tell me what she's about, you're not going. So she didn't go, she stayed home, right? But this is pure, it's politics, it's not science, right? But she could be president, go around the world, meet the Pope, do all of this, become a millionairess as well, by the way. You know, she could do all of this. And it was pure child abuse, really, right? Science without skepticism is not science. Science without debate is not science. Dogma in education is an abuse of a child's mind. And that's what you've got today. That's what you've got today. I was not able to speak to the school I planned to in your island today, or yesterday, right? And by the way, I made a video on it because if I was alone speaking to a school, I wouldn't mention climate. I don't want to impose my views on them. What I'd talk about is how science works, that it's got to be open. You've got to be skeptical. And I would talk about, appeals to authority. I would train them on being an open mind. That's what I'd have talked about. But they won't allow people like me and their children, right? They won't allow it. And in the meantime, you've got totally uneducated teachers on this subject. And then you can go to get certificates. Politicians can go and get certificates of brainwashing, that they're now gone through the climate course with only one side. Yeah? And the teachers don't even know the subject. They're just repeating garbage. Right? So dogma in education, planned debate in your schools was cancelled because they could not find anyone to debate me. There is a video out on this. There's a video I've issued on it. Right? That was disappointing on this trip. And, this is good. These are the last episodes of the whole night. This is the envoy from America on climate.
You said twice getting to net zero is going to be hard, really hard. And just remind everybody that will depend on whether or not we have some breakthrough technologies and breakthrough innovations, number one. But even if we get to net zero, we still have to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So this is a bigger challenge than a lot of people have sort of really grabbed onto yet.
Pure ignorance, that would kill you all, right? And by the way, global fuel fossil consumption is record highs, growing rapidly. There's the graph of gas, oil, and coal. All at record levels, all growing like hell. And you are not even the spot on the blue bottles behind in terms of effect. Yeah? You're going to waste a lot of money, and it's a total trap. Sustainability, and this is another quick. Sustainability. Decarbonise the services part of the island's economy by 2030. Well, that's amazing, because the only thing you've done by 2030 is the 20 megawatts of wind power, which has a contribution on average at best of 11% of your network. And that causes extra gas to be used, etc. So the net effect may be, something like 8%? But that's only of your grid. Your budget report puts your grid at 25% of your total emissions. So if we take a reasonable figure, after allowing for the excess gas you're going to burn for nothing, if we take a reasonable figure of 8%, so we take that down to its proportion. So what the wind farm does is reduce your island's emissions by what? By a quarter of 8%, which is about 2%. So all this wind farm you're putting in, all this superstructure you're putting in, these roads you're having to build, and all the ignoring of the huge amount of CO2 involved in producing these wind farms, in making them, the turbines, the blades, the shipments from around the world, all of that being ignored, you're going to save 2% of the island's emissions using your own figures. Europe's most efficient power station enters commercial operation. This is the gas station in Britain. And the MPs in Britain, this is another report. Hydrogen is not the answer to energy crisis Britain finds, because hydrogen is a dead subject. They haven't caught up yet, some politicians, but the MPs in Britain have just said that, not me. This is the power use in Britain with the gas. What's above the curve is what we save by wind. That's our savings. When it's below the curve, that's the costs of wind and solar. So we did save in the Ukraine crisis. But this is the 18 billion report. And again, I can provide it. It's in my main video, the source. But that one is 18 billion loss by having wind and gas together. That'll grow tremendously. And the green energy site I referred to said, and as we are going to increase restraint payments, the constraint payments, as we're going to do that, it's going to become enormous. They're going to dominate all the other costs, right? Because we'll have too much wind when we don't want it. But this is the end of the video, I'm afraid. And I have to sum it up. How can I sum up everything I've said tonight? And I thought about it, because I think we're being treated like sheep. So in this video I took from the internet somewhere, I buy stock footage in. It's got a farmer on a bike, and it's got all the dogs around. So I imposed signs on the dogs, and I put the control of who's doing the shepherding. Right? I cannot help feeling that today the globalists, the WEF, the UN, IPCC, all these international organizations are trying to control the population and treating us like sheep. And here you have the shepherd, and around them the dogs. 15-minute cities, climate alarmism, no ice cars, reduce food, restrict travel, ration energy, digital currency, lockdowns, and more. The most important thing is to be aware of how society is being shepherded like this. The most important thing is to understand this agenda is not good for you. That's it. Thank you.